We're going through massive changes in our country today. I would suggest to you that underlying all of these changes is the decision. Who do we serve, God or money? Who has value, God or money? And so I'd like to talk a little bit about this today. Jesus said this in Matthew 6, verses 19 through 25. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Well, America has memories of God, and memorials to God's involvement in our founding are everywhere. I thought one that was particularly interesting was the marble relief of Moses that is in the House of Representatives. There are, I believe, 24 reliefs around the outside walls. Actually, it's the inside walls, but up towards the top, the outer walls of the meeting room for the House of Representatives. And directly opposite Speaker Pelosi's chair, must be about 30 feet up or so, is this relief that you see on the screen, Moses. So every day, every speaker has seen that relief of Moses. And that's how she starts the day, that's how she ends the day, and during the course of the day. When Benjamin Netanyahu was there some years back, in his speech, at the end of it, at the conclusion, he spoke about Moses and how Moses joined our two nations together. Memories of God throughout Washington. The Pledge of Allegiance reminds us that we are a nation under God, not under money, not dedicated to the state, not under an individual, not vassals. We are a nation under God. I thought it was interesting how we got under God into our pledge. It's fairly recent in the life of our nation. It was in 1954.
Eisenhower.
Okay, the person you see on the left, certainly you recognize Dwight Eisenhower, but to his left is the Reverend George Doherty. George Doherty took over the pulpit that Peter Marshall had before. Some of you may have read some of his books or heard some of his sermons. Doherty is not as well known as Peter Marshall, but he was pastor of the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, which is a very historic church in Washington that Abraham Lincoln attended. And he himself was from Glasgow, Scotland, and he came here in 1950 when he was called as the pastor of the church. And he said this: I came from Scotland, where we said, God save our gracious queen, God save our gracious king. And he heard our Pledge of Allegiance, actually, when his son first recited it. And he said, here was the Pledge of Allegiance, and God wasn't in it at all. So Doherty preached about the need to insert under God into the pledge in February 1954 on one Sunday when President Dwight David Eisenhower was attending the church service. It was the Sunday where they were honoring Lincoln's birthday. And Doherty said this: to omit the words under God in the Pledge of Allegiance is to omit the definitive factor in the American way of life. He felt that under God was broad enough to include Jews and Muslims, but not atheists. And then he said this in his message, and subsequently, an atheistic American is a contradiction in terms. If you deny the Christian ethic, you fall short of the American ideal of life. Well, the very next week after his sermon, several bills were introduced in Congress to add the phrase under God to the Pledge of Allegiance, and Eisenhower signed the act into law on Flag Day, June 14th, 1954, so just a few months later. That's how we got under God. Ronald Reagan said, if we ever cease to be a nation under God, we will be a nation gone under. Well, it turns out that in recent years, there have been multiple attempts to remove the phrase under God from the pledge. None have yet been successful, although it is now perfectly acceptable and protected by law for students to not say the Pledge of Allegiance in school. And of course, there's so many other things that indicate that we have strayed as a nation. There are memories of God on our money. Now, there's an ironic beauty to our national motto being placed on our money, and it is this: every petty crook or corrupt politician who handles this money must read that there is a higher power. In God we trust, not this money. Every communist, every socialist, every pork barrel lobbyist, every backroom dealer has to touch money that's made sacred by this motto: in God we trust. And now Washington would like to rid the nation not only of the motto, but also of the very currency itself. As we go to e-currencies, and as the Federal Reserve ultimately embraces an e-currency, which I'm confident it will at some point in the future, we will completely eliminate the motto if we do not legislatively demand its removal before then. Now, other countries never pointed to God on their money. They may have mentioned him elsewhere. So Great Britain's 10-pound note, which you see in front of you, points to Charles Darwin. Darwin on one side, the Queen on the other. Darwin does not endow the British with any inalienable rights, as we believe God does. He's dead. He has no rights of his own, much less any to bestow on us or anyone else. But Great Britain still sings, God Save the Queen. And there are memories of God in the Star-Spangled Banner. In 1814, poet and lyricist Francis Scott Key penned the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Banner. It was interesting. It was originally known as the Defense of Fort McHenry. Star-Spangled Banner certainly sounds better. And I believe that flag to the lower right is the actual flag, or what is left of it, that flew over Fort McHenry. During the War of 1812, Key witnessed the attacks on Baltimore, and he wrote the words based on his experiences that night. And then those lyrics were printed in local newspapers, and they were set to the tune of an existing song called Anacreon in Heaven. And it was fairly common that they would take existing tunes and give them new lyrics. Not the easiest to sing, but certainly a very uplifting tune. And then it was officially arranged by John Philip Sousa. Now, what's interesting is the verse we don't sing, the fourth verse. You almost never hear it. But consider what he wrote. And this is the last verse. Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved home and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto: in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. 2,000 years before, Jesus said this: do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. And some translations say moths and rust destroy. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I would suggest to you that all the struggles we're having as a nation go back to the fact that there are people, a great many people, who view money as the source of ultimate value and having more as the thing that provides ultimate peace, comfort, joy. Rather, it is God who does these things. But as a large percentage of our money, or our population has embraced this false concept, we've seen our nation as a whole move in a direction where the government now, the chief source of money, is really becoming our master rather than our servant. No one can serve two masters, Jesus said. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? He's talking about fear and worry. Well, what do we have right now in America? We have fear and worry everywhere. You'd be hard-pressed to not find people who are living in fear. I'm amazed at how many people have locked themselves in their houses, not because the government told them to, but because they are so afraid of catching COVID-19. And yet you have a very large group of people who have concluded that this is grossly overblown, that more people die from the flu every year than will die from COVID-19, and that even the numbers themselves are suspect. And then there's conflicting recommendations on what to do and what not to do and so on. Rather than trying to solve that problem, what I'd like to suggest to you is that the fact that there is so much fear indicates a gross reduction in the overall faith that exists within America. Faith and fear are largely incompatible. Now, socialists would say money is our solution, that the ultimate problem has to do with money and its inequitable distribution. According to modern socialists, and this of course includes Marxists and communists, the underlying problem to be solved is the inequitable distribution of wealth, which is the ultimate cause of all social injustice, and also, by the way, the source of all power. Hence, distributing the money removes the power from those who have had it and gives it to others. Bernie Sanders on his website and in Facebook, on his Facebook posting, says this: the issue of wealth and income inequality is the great moral issue of our time. It is the great economic issue of our time. And it is the great political issue of our time. Okay, you get the sense that he views it as being absolutely critical, which he does. So what we see in our culture in other regards, that's not the ultimate problem. It's the inequitable distribution of wealth. And what they would suggest is that they can correct through government, through regulations, through laws, through enforcement of those laws, the inequitable distribution. Now, Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you. That in fact, it is a byproduct of sin. There are poor. And in the midst of that poverty that exists, and that's not saying that the poor are the sinners, but rather that that mankind in general is sinful, and that the byproduct of individuals being sinful is that others, and sometimes they themselves, wind up impoverished. Well, Bernie Sanders and others say they are going to correct what God has screwed up. In the Old Testament, it says that God has scattered his gifts to the poor. In other words, the poor don't have their share of the money, if you will. That's been given to others who are richer. But in God's economy that you read about in Galatians, the goal is that those who have will share with those who have not voluntarily, not by mandate, not by fiat, being forced to do it, and by sharing the burdens of those who are overburdened, then participating with God in the proper redistribution of wealth, if you will, and becoming, as it says in 1 Corinthians, co-workers with God, and having the joy that comes from doing exactly what gives God joy. He is joyful about the grace that he pours out on us. And when we give, we are participating with God in sharing that grace and in blessing others. The greatest way to be blessed is to use what you have, your time, your money, and such, to bless others. John Piper says socialism borrows the compassionate aims of Christianity while rejecting the Christian expectation that this compassion not be coerced or forced. Well, we are now moving into an experiment with our new administration where we will see this compassionate aim being forced, yet without compassion. Our founders believed you either trust God or you trust money. Well, we're now entered into this bold experiment to see if America can survive without God and the Bible at its foundation. It's not something that just happened with this election. This has been going on as a movement within our nation for a very long time, in some regards, right since the founding, but to a more substantial degree over the last generation. We will need to trust our government's ability to create money. That's the way things are set up. We will need to trust the fact that the dollar will continue to be a reserve currency, because otherwise we can't just continue to print money. And China, of course, is aggressively pushing the goal of replacing the dollar as a reserve currency with a basket of currencies that is anchored by the yuan. Will that happen? I don't know. But they are trying to make it happen. One of the things they're doing is signing agreements, and have been for quite some time, between nations directly that are not denominated in dollars, thus diminishing the value of the dollar as a reserve currency. The church is now viewed by many as worse than irrelevant. So there's a diminishment of the view of God and the trusting of God, and the byproduct of that is viewing the church as being of less value. In fact, it's viewed as an impediment to many that impedes them from living their lives. Churches have been closed, while casinos, supermarkets, and any number of other types of places of gathering have been open. Transgender issues, amazingly, were the highest priority for our new president. Well, the LGBTQ in their 100-day plan would like the new president to, through executive fiat, force schools of all types, including religious schools, to move to gender-neutral language, and that failing to embrace gender-neutral language and a series of other things favorable to transgenders and others, failing to do that, those schools should lose their accreditation. That's at all levels, college, high school, and so on. Then Planned Parenthood is getting their funding back. The Hyde Amendment looks like it may finally get overturned, and government money will be used to fund abortions. That's not clear yet. There's a battle going on, but we need to pray that the Hyde Amendment stays in effect. The Hyde Amendment prohibits the government to fund abortions. CARE, basically the major group that is lobbying on behalf of Muslims, has a variety of plans in their 100-day agenda that are not at all favorable to God, to the church. And the Squad, you've heard some of the statements that they've made, I'm sure, with regards to Christians and the church. Well, the impact of pushing God out of government, I think we have seen in the past. Is it a coincidence that just a few months after the Supreme Court in 1963 outlawed prayer and Bible reading in schools, that JFK was assassinated, and then the turmoil, the horrible turmoil of the 60s ensued? Well, whether you accept that as so or not, how have the schools done since removing prayer? Well, this is actually an old statistic. This is about an 8-year-old statistic. Los Angeles County is the largest school district in the country. Well over $30,000 is spent per student. I actually think it's about $36,000 right now. And they have well over a 50% dropout rate amongst Blacks and Hispanics. That doesn't sound like great success. Does money accomplish more than God can accomplish? Does money accomplish more than faith in God can accomplish? Would anyone claim the schools are better today than in 1963? People are bailing out of the schools. And now, with some of the decisions coming out of Washington just in the past few days, I've spoken with several folks who have their children or grandchildren in public schools. They want to pull them out. It's a tragedy. You have teachers all over the country who are refusing to work. It's a very strange world that we're in right now. Well, who do we trust in a crisis? Well, after 9/11, we joined together and we sang a prayer. And that prayer was, God bless America. It's a prayer. And you know what he did? There were no more attacks for almost a decade. And when an attack did come, interestingly, the first attack after that was a week after President Obama said we are no longer a Christian nation. Well, what does the government plan to handle our most recent emergency? It is to take the current cyclical crisis and make the people turn to the government to bail them out. They want to scare you out. They want to scare you into accepting a massive government restructuring. You've heard around the world the talk about the Great Reset or Build Back Better, a global plan to straighten everything out. God screwed it up. We're going to straighten it out. Now, they don't say it that way. God, the church, it's irrelevant. But we're going to straighten it out. Well, every dollar of that bailout in America shouts, in God we trust, and not in the government we trust. It's interesting the way that the Lord has structured these things. Here we are trusting government money instead of God. But then the question comes, who will bail the government out? The government has no money. They only have our money. Do you have spare money to give to the government? I don't. And they are taking our money and they're redistributing it, rewarding cronies and ne'er-do-wells, lobbyists, and insiders. In fact, we just had that discussion today. Nancy Pelosi invested $1 million in calls on Tesla several days in advance of decisions with regards to electric cars that caused those calls to massively increase in value. Perhaps it was a coincidence. They're taking the money, they're redistributing it. Well, will you see any of that money? Well, probably just enough to keep you suckling at the dried out breast of government largesse. You see, they want you to pray to the government. Oh, Mr. President, give me a job. Oh, Mr. President, heal me of this horrible disease. Oh, Mr. Congressman. Oh, Mr. Senator, please get those jobs back from China and India. Oh, please heal me. Oh, please bail me out of my personal debt on my college loans. Oh, please force my employer to keep me. Well, the state is not God, but what we have entered into is the God state. And so we now have a state that wants to be God. We have a God state. We have traded 10 common sense commandments for thousands upon thousands upon thousands and tens of thousands, perhaps even millions of bureaucratic regulations. The only problem is this: you need to be omnipotent to be God. And the federal government does not have the power to pull it off. Ask the post office. The federal government will run out of money. And the massive amount of money they are borrowing and printing will enslave and indebt our children for generations to come. The inflation that will surely be here in a few years will decimate the nest eggs of the elderly and destroy the dreams of the young. God or money? We need to see as a nation that ultimately we are dependent on God. And consider this: the last so-called stimulus has had so little effect that they are telling us we now need another one. Now, I'm going to share something with you. This screen I pulled directly out of a presentation that I gave in 2008, word for word, 12 years ago. Okay, and are we better? Are we richer? Well, the government says the rich will pay. Or will they? The tax code will become more progressive in the days ahead. You can count on it. They've already told us that. Consider this quote: in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. There will be a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. That's from Karl Marx, written in the Communist Manifesto. But if all the wealth from all the rich is taxed, it will only pay off a small portion of our national debt, much less our annual budget. Now, when I was a kid, we used to go to Saturday matinees. Some of you may remember that. Most of you are too young. And they would have these serials, and the movie would conclude with the hero, Captain Midnight, for example, who you're seeing here, about to go over the cliff in his car. And there was no question. He was lost. He was going to die. And you would see the car going over the cliff. And that was the end. To be continued. And then the next week you'd come back and you'd find out that Captain Midnight was able to open the door, roll out of the car, and he's hanging on to a branch and crawling back up the side of the cliff. And he's okay. And so as scary as it got, you always knew that everything would turn out well. Well, it's pretty scary these days. And now we just don't know. When you replace the foundation of a house and attempt to spare the house, that is possible, but it's very risky. What happens when you go to replace the foundation of a country? The risk is massive, and this has much greater risk. And history tells us that it is not a good plan for the long term. Just the history of America tells us that. When I was in Ghana, people would come to pay for an airline flight with a bag full of cedi. That's the Ghanaian currency. And you see a 2 cedi bill right there. And that's probably worth, I don't know, about 3 cents, maybe not even that much. And so they would come with bags full. And there might be 2 or 3 bags to buy a $200 ticket. And cash, I mean, it was cash society. And everything to people in a cash society is very expensive unless they're rich, and only a few are rich. And so I really wondered, and I've shared some of this with you, about how do you get to a cash society? But that led me to think, so what is money really worth? What is our money really worth? Excuse me. You see the wampum in the upper left photo there. What is wampum worth? Well, it was enough to buy a cow, so it had some value. Well, how did it have value? Well, you had imputed value. So what does one bead of wampum cost? What does one Bitcoin cost? What is 1 ounce of gold worth? How about the numbers that are online in your bank account? Well, the reality is they have no intrinsic value. Well, gold has some because it can be melted down and used in electrical circuits. It can be used for jewelry. It can be used for other things. But in terms of value as a currency, it's imputed. It's only what people ascribe to it. Value only exists when you have trust in whatever stands behind the currency. And right now, it's the government that stands behind our currency. And when you look at things like Bitcoin or you look at online banking, the integrity of networks, software, computers, you're trusting in that. The integrity of the companies and the politicians who have control, you're trusting in that. It's a scary thought, but the reality is that all of this has no intrinsic value. It's only what we think it's worth. And now we're coming to discover that someone, the government certainly, but others as well, could cancel you and cancel your access to money, cancel your access to credit. There's a representative, there's a former politician, maybe current politician, relatively young woman in her 20s, Laura Loomer, who can't open a bank account. She can't borrow any money. She can't buy a car. She can't get anything because she has been canceled. She has been placed on a no-fly list for no good reason other than she was a committed conservative who spoke her mind, a committed Christian who spoke her mind. So what is the value of what we have? Well, there has to do with trust, and there are circles of trust. You trust your family. Your mother will give you a loan when nobody else will. Okay, you trust your family. There's immediate family. Then there's the extended family. It's not as much of a trust relationship in some cases, but there's a trust relationship. It might be cousins. In the Middle East, they say my brother and me against my cousin and me against the world. Then there are friends and so on. And then historically, there have been tribes, and tribes are circles of trust. Tribes protect the people in the tribe to a greater degree than they protect those outside the tribe. And you've had tribes everywhere. Tribes in Scandinavia, tribes amongst the North American indigenous population against the Indians here. You have the South American tribes. You have tribes in Africa. You have clans. You have tribes pretty much everywhere. Tribes in China and so on. And these are circles of trust. People who band together, maybe related to, in many cases, but they band together and they establish trust. People are desperate for trust. You can't make it through life all by yourself. And so we trust one another, but we're very selective in our trust. In the church, you have a major circle of trust. You go halfway around the world and you meet a fellow committed Christian, and there is a bond of trust that exists that would not exist with someone else. You know a bit about how they think and what they believe, and so you trust them. Well, the world is largely cash-based because of a lack of trust. India demonetized so that they could eliminate the black market, and collect more taxes. They had a massive, massive, massive failure. They didn't get more taxes. They just badly damaged their economy, and they're now recovered from that. But the government wanted more money, and they wanted money that was being traded on the black market, because with cash, you can have a black market. And you eliminate as much cash as you can, you eliminate the black market. That is the reason that you've got central banks so excited worldwide about getting to an e-currency, because they can tax more. In Africa, people can't get mortgages because nobody trusts them to pay. So they save up enough to buy land, then they build a foundation, then they save up some more money, and they build the walls to the house, and the roof to the house, and so on. And then as they save more, then they build a wall around the compound, and then ultimately they add a gate, and they add razor wire or barbed wire over the top. And you'll see this all over the world, not just in Africa. You'll see it in the Caribbean. You'll see it in South America. You'll see it in sections of Asia, and so on. Lack of trust. More fundamental, what happens when they want to paint the house? So here's the question: when you don't have trust, does the painter trust the homeowner and go and buy the paint, trusting that the homeowner will pay him after he does the job? Or does the homeowner pay the painter before he finishes the job? It really becomes a problem when you don't have trust. So how do you build a society if you don't have that core trust? Trusting in God has as its derivative the ability for us to trust in one another, because we can know that God is there looking over our shoulder, and that he works all things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So we have this financial safety net that comes not from the government, but from God. And that even if we're taken advantage of, God is able to care for us and for our needs, and even bless us, even sometimes as a direct result of having been taken advantage of. The basic transactions of life become impossible as you move out of a circle of trust. And U.S. historically has built this incredible circle of trust that encircles the nation because of the underlying trust in God. We have this wonderful moral heritage. We easily trust. In fact, Americans historically have been known for their trust and the ability to do business on a handshake. Well, that has been going away. But integrity and honor are indeed our heritage. Credit has been key. Without mortgages, very little gets built. Without credit, America collapses. Well, the federal debt is approaching $30 trillion. Ben Bernanke says credit is the lifeblood of our society. And yet the basis of credit is trust. And the word itself comes from the Latin word credere, to entrust. Well, what happens as we see now, we have to have antiviruses on our computers, as we have to be concerned about people stealing our homes out from under us online with a title theft, or any number of other things. Probably everybody who's on this call today, on the Zoom call today, has had at least one credit card or one bank account or something that somebody has stolen some part of. We're in a strange time. E-currency now is really an approach to this lack of trust. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on were founded because there's no trust in the government. They're completely unaffiliated with any country. But the central bank digital currencies are really being started up or being implemented because there's no trust in the people. It tracks all monetary transactions. It should, in fact, eliminate the black market. At least that's what they believe. And therefore, all taxes will be collected. So fundamentally, a lack of trust. Well, we've lived in a nation that has existed for 250 years, and there's been massive trust, more than 250 years, and there's been massive trust. What happens if the trust evaporates, which is what is happening already? Well, Jesus speaks about trust. Paul writes about it in 1 Corinthians 13, and he says, love always trusts. What happens when you have a society that is being divided, where you're seeing hatred and anger and animosity directed one to another? Families band together. What happens when you seek to destroy the nuclear family, as BLM has said their goal is, as the LGBT group has said their goal is, as others have said that? Well, we're seeing collapse in America. Soon we're going to have social credit scores. It's already started. It's there in China. Senator Josh Hawley warned that the Chinese practice of using social credit scores is being imported to the United States as the newest form of an intensifying cancel culture. Okay, the whole purpose of social credit scores is so you know who to cancel. It's to permit the government and others to reward those who are doing and saying things that they think is good, things that they want to encourage, and to punish those who are doing and saying things that they want to discourage. Everyone, Hawley said, knows what a credit score is, but social credit scores are new. They're the latest corporate import from communist China, developed, by the way, by Google, where government and big business monitor every citizen's social views and statements. Imagine that. Every email being monitored. Hawley said it in an op-ed in the New York Post. And they're the latest form of cancel culture in this country, as corporate monopolies and the left team up to shut down speech they don't like and force their political agenda on America. For those who still believe in free speech and the First Amendment, this is the time to take a stand. So how do you restore the trust? I would suggest to you that evangelism restores the trust. We live in a post-Christian culture. The church is generally irrelevant. But when a person comes to Christ, they become part of the family. They become part of the circle of trust. And as we expand the family of God, we will change the culture. There's one Greek word for church that I particularly like. There are three words, but the one is kuriakous. The church is the family of the Lord. And think about this. God uses family words throughout the Bible, like our Father, a family word, brothers and sisters in Christ, children of God, sons of God. Families trust one another. It's a relationship of trust. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, we're told. You can travel halfway around the world, meet a family member, a fellow Christian, and all of a sudden, the level of trust between you goes way up. I can recall well being in Ghana in this cash-based society where there actually was a tremendous lack of trust, and meeting someone, talking with them. It was obvious they were a Christian. I wound up going to church with them that Sunday, Action Chapel in Accra, Ghana. It was a 3-hour service. And frankly, it was the most encouraging, spirit-filled service I've ever been to. It was phenomenal. There was a sense there of God working in a way that I've never experienced before in a church service. In the midst of a society impoverished, struggling, this wonderful, wonderful service. Well, the USA was once a Christian nation. Business was done a handshake. Marriage was done without prenuptial agreements. There was a time, and I believe there can be a time again, where God is at the core of our nation. I would encourage you today to consider how you might participate in sharing the good news. And that ultimately, as you share the good news with others, as you share the gospel, we will see people come to the Lord, and we will see the culture change as the people change. How do you change America? One person at a time.